Welcome to the gift of being home. I'm Ann Lovely, CEO of Coastal Hospice, and for years, we've had the privilege of walking alongside families here on the Lower Eastern Shore during some of life's most sacred and vulnerable moments. And one thing we hear over and over again is this: we wish we had known sooner. Hospice is often misunderstood. Families wait too long. Caregivers feel like they're doing it all alone, and fear can take the place of understanding. So we created this space. For 46 years, our community has trusted Coastal Hospice to provide comfort, dignity, and support at the end of life. And this podcast is just an extension of that. We're here to talk honestly about what hospice really is, when to call, and how to care for someone you love with more confidence and peace. We'll walk through things like when hospice is appropriate, what the final days can look like, how to manage pain without fear, and how to support caregivers along the way. Whether you're caring for someone, referring patients, or just trying to understand more, this is a place for clarity and compassion. Because being home isn't just a place, it's about comfort, peace, and love. I'm really glad you're here.
Hi everyone, we're so glad you're here with us today. For this conversation, we're going to talk about a really important and often misunderstood topic, the idea that hospice means giving up. This is something we hear a lot, and it can carry a lot of emotion for patients and families. But the reality is, hospice is about something very different. I'm really glad to be joined by Joel Beiler today. Joel is our supportive services team leader here at Coastal Hospice, and he brings such a meaningful perspective to this conversation. Joel, thank you so much for being here. To start us off, can you help us reframe this idea? What does it really mean when someone chooses hospice care?
When someone chooses hospice care, we often associate it with a phrase that we hear from doctors or nurses. And that phrase is when there's nothing more that can be done. And often that creates in us that feeling of dread. It creates the conversations in our own mind about end of life and death. But hospice does not mean giving up. And throughout this podcast, throughout this time together, I'm going to use intentionally words like gentle hands, home, river, waterfall, miracle, bridge, safe harbor, journey, a newborn baby, lantern, twilight, canvas, painting, a new frontier, and blooming. Now you look at those words and you don't think death and dying. You don't think the hard stuff. You think positive things. And that is the shift, is thinking of hospice in those terms. And I'm going to flesh that out as we go through this conversation today. But it's been fascinating because hospice is really about choosing quality and help and comfort, assistance, and really a team of people that can come alongside of a patient and a family. And that's what hospice is all about.
Wow, that's such a powerful way to look at it. I don't think I've ever looked at it in that kind of way. Can you talk a little bit more about how hospice shifts that focus from curing to caring?
Yeah. So saying that hospice isn't giving up means that even though the focus shifts from curing an illness to caring and providing comfort and dignity, quality of life, some of those things I just mentioned, there is still a deep, compassionate engagement. And it's like a gentle hand guiding a person home instead of a final surrender. We often think of hospice as a final surrender, or as we've already talked, giving up, but it's not. It's really giving a hand to hold and leading a person home. It's also like a river that's rushing toward a waterfall, that experience of curing and running to doctors and going to all of the treatments. it's a river heading toward a waterfall, and we're filled with hope at that point, because we know that something might go into remission. We know that a heart treatment might help, or dialysis might help. But hospice steps in and becomes like a bridge, guiding a person gently and calmly into that safe harbor of transition. When that phrase that we mentioned a moment ago, that there's nothing else we can do, well, there certainly is something we can do, and that is providing that assistance, providing that help. And then rather than fighting that current of that river and that waterfall, and trying to cure and go through all of those treatments and procedures and injections and infusions, it invites the patient and the family and us to savor each breath, to savor each moment. The focus then turns from alleviating the pain and the curative piece to nurturing the emotional, spiritual needs, the creating space for love and connection. And so that every journey, every step of that journey is wrapped in care. And that's the difference between the curing and the caring.
Wow. Thank you so much for explaining that with us. And can you explain a little bit, when that shift does happen, what changes do you often see in a patient's quality of life?
I'm going to use the image of a newborn baby in this one. And it feels weird sometimes to talk about newborn babies and the death and dying of an older person. But what do we as parents do for the quality of life of our kids who can't do for themselves? We care for them.
Right.
We feed them. We change them. We rock them. We hold them. We engage with them. We connect with them. Hospice is just the same. We do those same things with those individuals in our family, those that we love, that need our help. And then along with the hospice care team, the nurse and the social worker and the chaplain and the volunteer and the aide, we provide all those things, and the person's quality of life goes almost back to the same quality of life that they had as a newborn when they couldn't do for themselves. And I love that picture of the quality of life for someone at end of life being very similar to that which we have all experienced and received at the beginning of our lives.
Right. And I really think that may surprise people that are tuning in today, that there can actually be stabilization or improvement with hospice. How does hospice help patients focus on what matters most to them during this time?
Yeah, it's really the magic of hospice. It's using one of those other words that I mentioned earlier. It's like a lantern in the midst of twilight. The care team listens deeply to each patient's hopes, their relationships, their unfinished dreams. And then by crafting a plan, we call it a care plan, and each of our disciplines set up a care plan for that patient, for that family. But by crafting that care plan, it honors that person's personal values. Whether it's reconnecting with family, revisiting a favorite place, or simply being present. Hospice, therefore, becomes a canvas where the patient paints often their most meaningful, insightful moments, sometimes of their lives. One of the ways that we do that very well is even through like our music therapist that creates legacy projects with album covers and lyrics to songs, and providing home concerts for a patient who was a lifelong musician, and allowing family members to come in and have, in essence, a final concert by their loved one. And those legacy projects are so, so important. Oftentimes at end of life and in hospice care, some of the connections that are done with the patients and the families have actually never been done throughout their life. And so it actually elevates, even as we were just talking, the stabilization and the improvement. And sometimes we see patients actually improve once they've come onto hospice because of all of this directed input and work and compassion and care. And so it doesn't surprise us when somebody comes out of a hospital situation or a curative situation or a treatment situation and has the support of hospice and will bounce back some. And in some cases, we actually have to graduate that person off of hospice for a period of time because they do no longer meet the Medicare requirements and guidelines, because hospice and that support have actually stabilized them, improved them, and their quality and care of life.
And that's very encouraging to hear. And I'm sure it's encouraging for those that are listening today. You know, that idea of choice is just so important, I feel like, to patients and families. Now, Joel, how would you describe the decision to choose hospice? Is it more of an active decision than people might think?
It is, absolutely. Choosing hospice, and often that's, I think, where people become fearful, is they hear the word hospice and they say, oh, this is something that's being done to us. This is something that it is our last ditch effort. And that's, again, why we go back to that hospice doesn't mean giving up. It means providing support, the necessary support to the patient, to the caregivers, to the family. And it is a choice. Choosing hospice is like planting a flag in a new kind of frontier. None of us have typically ever gone this way before. When it comes down to our family member, even for those of us that work at hospice, it's different because we are making that choice. It's not a passive thing. It's an active step toward aligning care with what is truly valuable. It's a decision to say, I'm choosing how I want to spend this time surrounded by what matters most to me. And in that way, it's a profound act of choice and of agency. And I love that about hospice.
Right. And I feel like a lot of times those out there think hospice is just for the patient. And when it's a lot to do with the families. And I want families to be listening to this, because for the families, can you explain how does hospice help shift their experience from one of crisis to one of connection?
And often that crisis language is some of what we've been talking about, is the curative, the visits, the injections, the nonstop tiring process of taking taking the emphasis being on fixing things and healing things, to acknowledging and to therefore choosing this alternate path that provides comfort and care and legacy. It's actually a tender transformation. Hospice creates this gentle space where families, and that's the family, not just the patient, but the family members, sometimes the paid caregivers that have been in the home for years and years and years, who are like family, where families can step out of the whirlwind of activity and uncertainty and the unknown, and instead of being caught in that constant crisis, that word that we just used, they're guided toward a shared presence. Going back to that bridge image over the river, like a bridge that lets them hold each other in tenderness instead of crisis, instead of running to everything. And then through those conversations, those rituals, those simple moments, they rediscover the connection that they maybe have even lost throughout their life and relationship with each other. And it allows, and hospice allows, for love to bloom even in the midst of that transition and in that process.
Wow. Thank you so much, Joel, for this. This has really been such a meaningful conversation. And I think one of the biggest takeaways is that hospice is not about giving up. It's about choosing how you want to live during this time. It's about shifting that focus to comfort, quality of life, and what truly matters most to both patients and their families. Joel, thank you so much for helping reframe this in such a thoughtful and compassionate way. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. We're so glad that you spent this time with us. We hope this conversation has brought a new perspective and help ease some of those misconceptions around hospice care. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.